Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar, Plymouth, Michigan and Nathpragas, USA, I welcome you all to the 10th meet of the Sikh Women Book Club. Today is the 10th meet of our book club, as I just alluded to, and I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly step back and reinforce the reason for this journey that we are on. So, ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਡੇ ਟੂ ਡੇ ਲਿਵਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਪੈਟਰਨਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਨਵੇਰੀਬਲੀ ਇਸਟੈਬਲਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਰਨੇ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਹਨ ਅਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪੈਟਰਨਸ ਦੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਮੈਕੈਨਿਜ਼ਮਸ ਜੋ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਸਟੈਂਟੇਨੀਅਸ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ, ਸ਼ਾਰਟ ਟਰਮ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ, ਨੀਡ ਟੂ ਗੈਟ ਟੂ ਅ ਕਨਕਲੂਜਨ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਜੋ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਨੂੰ ਤੋਰਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਰਸੈਪਸ਼ਨ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਤੁਰ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਇਨਫੈਕਟ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪੈਟਰਨਸ ਦੇ ਇੰਨੇ ਅਧੀਨ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਅਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਪੈਟਰਨਸ ਦੇ ਥਰੂ ਹੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਨੂੰ ਅਨਫੋਲਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਐਕਚੁਅਲੀ ਸਟੇਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਚਲੇ ਗਏ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਮਾਈਂਡ ਦੀ ਗਰੋਥ in the ways that we can more fully experience the world, ਉਹ ਵਾਲੇ patterns, experiencing the patterns ਜੋ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਡੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਮੁਹੱਈਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਾਉਂਦੀ। ਸੋ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੋ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਨੇ, ਬੁੱਕ ਰੀਡਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਨੇ ਜਾਂ ਟੈਕਸਟ ਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਜਾਣ ਦੇ ਜੋ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਨੇ, ਟੈਕਸਟ ਜੋ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਰੀਅਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਡਿਸਟਿੰਕਟ ਕਾਈਂਡ ਆਫ ਐਫਰਟਸ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆਮ ਤੌਰ 'ਤੇ ਮੁਹੱਈਆ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੇ। ਪਰ ਰਿਐਲਿਟੀ ਇਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨੇ, ਜੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਰੀਅਲਾਈਜ਼ੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨੇ, ਐਕਚੁਅਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਸਟੇਸਿਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਕੱਢਦੇ ਨੇ ਅਤੇ ਟੈਕਸਟ ਜੋ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਸ ਸਟੇਸਿਸ 'ਚੋਂ ਕੱਢਣ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਪੋਟੈਂਟ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਟਰ ਹੈ। ਸੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਟੈਕਸਟ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੰਨੀ ਦੇਰ ਤੋਂ, ਇਹ ਟਾਈਮਲੈਸ ਕਲਾਸਿਕਸ ਨੇ, ਇਹ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਓਵਰ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਨੇ, ਰਿਅਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤੇ ਗਏ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਟਾਈਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਸਪੇਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਇੱਕ ਐਫਰਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਟੈਕਸਟ ਨੂੰ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਰਿਅਲਾਈਜ਼ੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਈਵ ਰੱਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿੰਗ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਸੈਸ ਨੂੰ ਲਾਈਵ ਰੱਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਐਕਚੁਅਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਐਕਟਿਵ ਫਾਰਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਸ ਟਾਈਮ 'ਤੇ ਲਿਖ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਐਂਸਿੰਗ ਨੂੰ ਕੌਨਸ਼ੀਅਸਲੀ ਰਿਅਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਜਰਨੀ 'ਚ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਇਸੀ ਕਲਚਰ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਉਂਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਜੋ ਬੁੱਕ ਕਲੱਬ ਦਾ ਟਾਕ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 3 ਬੁੱਕਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਪਹਿਲੀ ਬੁੱਕ ਹੈ ਐਲਕੇਮਿਸਟ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਗੁਨੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹਦਾ ਬੁੱਕ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਦੂਸਰੀ ਬੁੱਕ ਹੈ ਸੇਕਰਡ ਸੀਡਸ ਜੋ ਭੈਣ ਜੀ ਅਮਰਜੀਤ ਕੌਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਉਹਦਾ ਬੁੱਕ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਨਗੇ ਅਤੇ ਐਟ ਦੀ ਐਂਡ 3rd ਬੁੱਕ ਰਿਵਿਊ ਹੋਏਗਾ ਜੀ ਸੌਂਗਸ ਆਫ ਮਾਈ ਸੈਲਫ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਸੈਲੀਬ੍ਰੇਟਡ ਪੋਇਟ Walt Whitman ਨੇ ਬੁੱਕ ਲਿਖੀ ਸੀ। So with that, I'd like to invite Guneet Kaur to come to the stage and present the book review on The Alchemist.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today I'll be talking about The Alchemist. The author of this book, Paulo Coelho, is a Brazilian lyricist and novelist. He was born on August 24th, 1947 in Rio de Janeiro. He determined early on in his life that he wanted to be an author, but he was discouraged by his parents. Growing up, he rebelled against the teachings of his Roman Catholic upbringing and was temporarily sent to a psychiatric hospital by his parents for this. In 1970, Coelho dropped out of law school and traveled through South America, North Africa, Mexico, and Europe. When he returned in 1972, he began writing pop and rock music lyrics with a well-known Brazilian singer and songwriter. After a brief imprisonment in 1974, Coelho began working for Polygram and CBS Records until 1980. He embarked on travels in Europe and Africa while working for the company, and it was then where he walked on the route of Santiago de Compostela, which were 500 miles of roads first used in the Middle Ages by pilgrims traveling from France to Spain. The journey inspired a new sense of Catholicism in him, encouraging him to ultimately write his first book, which translates to a Diary of Magus. It was published in 1992 and reissued under the name The Pilgrimage in 1995. It was in 1988 where Coelho went on to publish The Alchemist, an allegory of an Andalusian shepherd boy's journey across North America as he searches for treasure. The boy learns to speak the language of the world and therefore receives his heart's desire. Though the book attracted little attention when first written, it was later translated into French and became one of the best sellers in France in the early 1990s. As it got translated into more languages, it became a worldwide phenomenon. Now, it is the most translated book in the world by any living author and has sold about 35 million copies. His other 26 million publications have sold over 65 million copies in at least 59 languages, some of which include The Supreme Gift in 1991, The Valkyries in 1992, and Brida in 1996. In that same year, Coelho founded the Paulo Coelho Institute, which provides support to children and the elderly to this day by combating poverty and helping underprivileged members of Brazilian society. Coelho now lives in Geneva, Switzerland, with his wife and continues to publish books. So now for the book talk, I'm going to start by giving a brief summary of the book. The Alchemist is about a man named Santiago who has a troubling dream in which there's a child that tells him to seek a treasure at the bottom of the Egyptian pyramids. He consults a strange, magical man named Melchizedek, as well as a gypsy woman, who both tell him to follow his vision and go to Egypt. So, Santiago sets off, and along the way, he meets an Englishman who wants to consult an old and powerful alchemist. Along with this man, Santiago journeys off into a desert, where he meets and falls in love with a woman named Fatima. When the alchemist that the Englishman is pursuing hears word of Santiago's vision, he convinces him to leave Fatima and come finish his journey. Thus, the both of them leave off, and Santiago is able to learn about the alchemist's wisdom. When they reach the pyramid, Santiago is left alone by the alchemist, who'd gifted him gold and sent him off. Santiago begins digging at the foot of the pyramid, but two robbers who see him begin beating him up. When they find out about his vision and how he's looking for treasure, they determine that he doesn't have money and they leave him alone. One of the robbers scoffs at him by telling him about his own similar dream about an abandoned treasure at the bottom of a tree in Spain. When Santiago goes there and digs at the site, however, he finds the robber's dream to be true, and the book ends with him planning to return to an awaiting Fatima. Obviously, this was a very oversimplified summary of the book, but it gives a good background to analyze some of its themes. One of the central main themes here is that of a person's purpose, or a personal legend, and according to the book, achieving this is the only way for someone to live a happy and satisfying life. This idea can be analyzed further as stating that the universe only achieves perfection when everyone pursues their personal legend, and achieving this is life's central spiritual goal. In the book, Santiago gave up his flock and his companionship with Fatima to achieve this purpose, which implies that people must give up some of the things or companions that they hold closest to their hearts to achieve their purpose. People who weren't able to, in the book, lived to regret what they hadn't done and missed out on all the things the universe could have offered them. Another theme of this book was that of nature's unity. In the universe of this story, human beings, entities, animals, plants, and objects are all connected in some way, shape, or form. The novel states that the world's soul has a personal legend for everything, whether it be a grain of sand, a cat, or a dish. Each of the things in this book are connected with one another, to the point where Santiago is even able to ask the desert, the wind, and the sun to help him out when he's in trouble. As the alchemist tells Santiago, everything from a grain of sand to God himself shares the same spiritual essence. The third and last theme I'd like to talk about is fear, specifically about its danger. Throughout the book, Santiago experiences many different forms of fear, such as spiritual fear when he's unsure of whether he will be able to turn himself into the wind when the alchemist commands him to try. Material fear when he has to leave behind his possessions to pursue his personal legend. Childhood fear when the gypsy woman is interpreting his dream. And physical fear of dying when he is in battle with enemy forces. Santiago's mentors mirror enlightened figures by condemning fear and teaching that it can't get in the way of you achieving your personal legend. By overcoming fear, Santiago was able to both fulfill his purpose and live a happy life. The power and the brevity of fear can also be seen in one of the other characters of the book, a crystal merchant. This character wants to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, which is required for most Muslims to make at least once in their lives. Believing that completing the pilgrimage would render him purposeless, however, he lets his fear cloud his motives and lives a miserable life. By reading this book, you can see that it was written in a creative style. Coelho utilizes symbols throughout his story to convey his messages and themes more subtly and powerfully to the reader. One thing in particular that stood out to me was how he put so much thought into some of the commonly looked aspects of the story. For example, a good portion of the book was spent in the desert. Relating this to the theme of universality, we can interpret this specific choice of setting as Coelho's way of conveying that even in the most remote and seemingly lifeless areas, the concept of unity and oneness holds true. We can also analyze the role of alchemy by serving as a symbol for Santiago's personal legend. The philosopher's stone, in particular, which turns lead into gold, can be interpreted as representing how pursuing one's purpose can transform their lives from being lifeless to colorful. Overall, this book was very inspiring to read. Throughout the story, it was humbling to see Santiago overcome his struggles to achieve his personal legend. For example, it was hard for him to leave Fatima and continue his journey, but he did just that. You could see him get the better of his fears as well when he, somewhat unwillingly, left his material possessions to continue his journey. He overcame both his fears and his setbacks in traveling, and eventually he was rewarded for his persistence with his treasure. The story has helped me remember that no matter the setbacks or the distractions, it's important to remember what exactly your purpose or goal is and to pursue it with passion. Santiago's willpower never fails to inspire the readers of this book. This reinforced the idea that it is necessary to struggle and be able to make sacrifices to reach one's dream. I highly encourage the people sitting in the audience here today to read this book. Thank you for listening. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.
Guneet's review of the book, The Alchemist, beckons the alchemist in each one of us to convert ourselves into gold. And the formula to do so is to recognize what each of our personal purpose is. Because until that recognition doesn't exist, the personal purpose is not identified, and the personal purpose is not identified, we do not have a basis to convert ourselves into the gold, thereby realizing the alchemist potential that each one of us has. And we get the assurance from the alchemist that if we do set out on that path of converting through our personal purpose ourselves into gold, then the elements of nature, the elements of universe will side with us and enable us to realize that goal. With that, I'd like to thank Guneet for her book review, and I'd like to invite Penji Amarjeet Kaur for her book review on the book Sacred Seeds.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. First of all, I want to say thank you to Harjot Kaur. Because of her, I'm standing here now. So, seeing the connection of Sacred Seed with me, and another one like you, she's not here, Harleen Kaur. Before I knew that the book was in front of me, I don't know when she ordered it. So, thank you for that. And now I'm going to share with you my read and what I was thinking when I was reading. So that's Sacred Seeds. Sacred Seeds is a collection of essays published by the Golden Sufi Center in California, which focuses on spiritual ecology. Because of this, the book has contributions from dozens of spiritual leaders on the sacredness or divinity of the natural seed and natural earth, and what we must all do to protect it. The book was also introduced by Dr. Vandana Shiva, who is an environmental activist based on Delhi. She actually did her BS from Punjab University in Chandigarh before completing her PhD in Canada. This is maybe why she is so deeply committed to changing the farming crisis in Punjab and India as whole, especially the issues with pesticides, chemicals, and farming rights. The other contributors came from a variety of backgrounds and traditions: Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, indigenous communities from all over. I will not have time to share all of their biographies, but I will try to give an overall picture of the unifying message they shared from their individual perspectives. Reading this book, the whole time I had the same question: do we even know what a sacred seed is? Or have we just been brainwashed by industrial people, rulers, and what all the people in power have told us is a real seed? Reading about the book, I kept thinking about how our parents or grandparents' way of life was so different, how they preserved the sacred seed. Reading the book, I was reminded of different natural ways of life that I learned from my parents. Going with Pitaji and covering head in childhood, just automatically, because my older sisters were doing it, 12 or 13 years old, all of a sudden there's change when I even didn't have my own chunni. And I took the chunni and covered my head when I was going with him out. So that time I didn't know how did that happen, but I always knew whatever they are saying or doing, that's the right thing to do. So when I shared with my friends or they saw me out, always with skirt or pants, girl was covering her head out in public with a father. So when they asked, and then they asked me, why do you do that? But that time I was just doing it because I knew that will make them happy. So I didn't know the answer. And recently, my own age, about same age lady I shared, and she asked me the same question. And she said, why did he do that, or why did you do that? And now I think I have the answer. That was the right thing to do. So we didn't realize it, but without saying anything, just by living that life, they were saving and passing on the sacred seed of Sikhi. If any of us understand what sacred seed is, then we have duty to preserve it and pass it on to the next generation. The same way British came and disrupted natural way of life, industrial methods of farming, agriculture are continuing this, getting rid of originality. Dr. Vandana Shiva said, whatever happens to a seed affects the web of life. When the original source is manipulated with chemicals and external forces, then this is where the problems begin. All of the authors had one clear message: it's up to us to take the sacred seed back into our hands and return to natural ways. Rabbi Rami Shapiro said, each generation of flora contains the seeds of promise for the next, and it is our task to preserve that promise by protecting those seeds. But this still means living in hukam and not thinking we are in charge of anything. Rabbi Shapiro said also, we sow in unknowing, taking nothing for granted, trusting the future without controlling the future, emphasis on trust and sowing seed in abundance. I also want to share some words from the introductory author, Dr. Vandana Shiva. She said, food is the creator. We are what we eat. When we are careless with food, we are careless with ourselves. Going with the kids to camps, we always heard a line: if you eat trash, watch trash, listen to trash, you will become trash. This is why Guru Sahib shows the importance of Sangat. When we are influenced by the wrong things, the seed of life is destroyed. It also becomes trash. One author, Mary Ann Burris, shared the same idea from Buddha's teachings. She said in Buddhism, they believe each person has 51 seeds within them. Some of them are positive qualities like faith, energy, humility, but others are greed, selfishness, pride. Whichever seed we cultivate and keep healthy are the ones that will grow. Our Sangat is our natural environment, and our food is also part of a nutritional Sangat. Whatever we put inside of us, if it is ideas or food or love or hate, that is what will grow. So by now we realize the sacred seeds they speak of are not just of plants. Baba Nanak planted and cultivated the seed of Sikhi. We talk about how crops have changed and are no longer good for our health. Similarly, Sikhi seed was tried to be destroyed, first by the Mughals, then by so many more. Now there has been a strong effect and we don't even understand the essence of Sikhi seed anymore. The real Sikhi seed people try to finish that seed, they call those Sikhs. The real Sikhi seed people try to finish that seed, they call those Sikhs who try to protect it extremists. Within plants, we have started to divide plants between organic and all these other labels. We have divided the seeds. If something truly manifests as its original sacred seed, there is no longer any difference between them. It will be strong and firm its foundation, whether it is food or human life, whether it is the seed of Sikhi or the seed of plants. We have a duty to cultivate it naturally. We have a duty to cultivate it naturally and pass it on to the next generation. People of different groups shared from their perspectives. Sometimes we read these books and get so impressed, but when I was reading, all I could think about was Baba Nanak. He covered this all in Gurbani, science, nature, he covered it all. We don't have time to cover it all now, but if we read it, we will see these ideas. I will share a few examples. Whenever something bad or good happens, in Punjabi, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਕੋਈ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕਰਮਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਲ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅੱਜ ਕਰਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ ਉਹ ਕੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਪਿਛਲਾ ਕਰਮ ਹੋ ਜਾਊਗਾ, ਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅੱਜ ਬੀਜਦੇ ਪਏ ਆ ਉਹ ਕੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਫਲ ਮਿਲ ਜਾਊਗਾ। ਸੇਮ ਥਿੰਗ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ, ਜੈਸਾ ਬੀਜੇ ਸੋ ਲੁਣੈ, ਜੋ ਖੱਟੇ ਸੋ ਖਾਏ। ਗੁਰੂ ਅਰਜਨ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਫੇਰ ਕਹੀ ਆ, ਜੈਸਾ ਬੀਜੇ ਤੈਸਾ ਖਾਸਾ। ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦਾਸ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਉਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹੀ ਆ, ਜੇਹਾ ਬੀਜੈ ਸੋ ਲੁਣੈ, ਫਲ ਕਰਮ ਸੰਭਾਲਾ। ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੀਆਂ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਤੇ ਪਰ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਹੀ ਆ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ 10 ਜਾਮਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰੀ ਰਿਪੀਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਸਾਡਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਹੀ ਮਿਲੂਗਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ। Buddhist teacher Acharya Judy Leaf makes a similar point to what Guru Sahib is saying here. She said each of us has within us this seed or potential to awaken our inherent wisdom and compassion. We discover this potential within us. We can water our seed with loving kindness and prepare its bed with mindfulness. When we do so, the growth of the seed of awakening will be effortless and natural. The ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਸਹਿਜ ਆ ਜਾਊਗਾ। So that's what they are trying to say. Our own flourishing and the flourishing of the environment and our fellow beings are inseparably linked. Judy Leaf's ideas remind us of Ik Onkar, that we are all one, and to make sure that we plant the right seed in ourselves means that the right seed will be planted everywhere all around us. Other authors also focused on the deep connection between the seed and all of creation. Swami Veda Bharati said, neglect the seed and we neglect the entire universe. Its change of causes and effects and subtle forces that manifest in our very self in the seed is that through whose power the vast vata tree grows. Understand the seed and the meaning of the universe, its causes and effects, and all processes of manifestations, as well as our ethical duties in life, are revealed to us. Even though we are far from realizing the sacred seed again, doctor of Chinese medicine and Taoist master Dr. Nan Lu spoke really beautifully. He said everything is in God's will, or whatever word one uses to refer to the indescribable and unconditional love of the universal force. From this angle, even unnatural foods are God's manifestation. In God's eye, there is no time, so the answer to being able to process GMO foods may exist 1,000 years from now. Also, if these foods can grow in this dimension, somehow they connect to its life force. Our own DNA knows how to process unnatural material if we are peaceful and have faith. If you can do this, then you will be one of those people who will discover the answers within, and then your peaceful mind will impact others. Honor the seed and remember to honor the wisdom you were born with. You too are in God's will. Since this is Women's Book Club, I want to mention our importance in human life. We are like earth or land. Human seeds depends on us. What kind of atmosphere we give to seed. ਜੇ ਧਰਤੀ ਬੰਜਰ ਹੈ ਤਾਂ ਬੀਜ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਉਗੂਗਾ? As a healthy plant or tree, banjar dharti is not, and banjar dharti, healthy seed is not going to, or plant not going to become tree. What are ways that we can do this? Since I mentioned about the mother's role, first thing, what we feed our kids. Go back to Guru Nanak Dev Ji's time. Bhai Lalo's Kodre di roti and Malak Pago's modern rich food puriyan chole. But Baba Nanak picked Godre di roti. Research and learn about natural Punjabi millets and grains. Remembering growing up in Punjab in winter, bajre di roti te saag, motha te bajre di khichdi, and so many more traditional foods. We barely had anything artificial sweetened, if at all. Now we put white bleach sugar in our chai every day. We barely had outside cooked food until we left home. Then I remember I used to get sick every time I had to eat hostel food. Now we ignore our body's natural reaction for the taste. Overall, this book really shows the power and importance of the seed. Nature, Vaiguru's Hukam, acts in its own way and adapts over time. As close we stay to nature, we get the fruit organic, we are going to be happy and healthy. Vaiguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaiguru Ji Ki Fateh. Oh, Juk maaf.
Penji Amarjit Kaur plots the definition of sacred seed on a rather wide spectrum, and she dwelled on what the term sacred seed means to her. And in that dwelling, she revealed to us the metaphysical construct of spiritual values as being what she recognizes as the sacred seed, which she inherited from her parents. She also dwelled on the seed of Sikhi, citing different phrases from Gurbani. She calls upon the need to restore all the seeds to their pristine forms so that the pristine seed can be passed across generations to come. Otherwise, there are implications that our future generations might face. And then at the end, she does call to the role of women in preserving the sacredness of human seed by serving it a sanctimonious setting. So all the personal dimensions she added to the book review and the call she makes from a very sacred place in her heart, I'm sure the audience has heard that and will like to personally read this book to form their own perception of what sacredness of seed means to them. Thank you, Benji. With that, we are now coming to the third part of today's meet, which is a book talk on Songs of Myself, a very famous poetic text which was written by Walt Whitman. So there are a few sections in which I'll cover the book review. We'll have a brief talk about the poet and the work. We'll also take a gleam into the summarized review of the poem. Then we will look at what are the various elements of poetry that Walt Whitman uses in this book. And then we will talk about I'll narrate some of my favorite readings, favorite stanzas that really impressed me in the reading of the book. And finally, we will conclude with a brief philosophical analysis on the poem. So called the Bard of Democracy and considered one of America's most influential poets, Walt Whitman Jr., hereafter Walt Whitman or just Whitman, was born on May 31st, 1819 in West Hills, Long Island in New York. The second of Louisa Van Velser's and Walt Whitman Sr.'s 8 surviving children, he grew up in a family of modest means. While earlier Whitmans had owned a large parcel of farmland, much of it had been sold off by the time he was born. As a result, Waltman's father struggled through a series of attempts to recoup some of that earlier wealth as a farmer, as a carpenter, and a real estate speculator. Considered one of America's most influential poets, Walt Whitman aimed to transcend traditional epics and eschew normal aesthetic form to mirror the potential freedoms to be found in America. In 1855, he published Leaves of Grass, a collection of poetic works. The book is now a landmark in American literature, though at the time of its publication it was considered highly controversial. Though it was first published in 1855, Whitman spent most of his professional life writing and rewriting Leaves of Grass, revising it multiple times until his death. There have been held to be either 6 or 9 individual editions of Leaves of Grass, the count varying depending upon how they are distinguished. Among the work in Leaves of Grass lie collections such as Songs of Myself, I Sing the Body Electric, and Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking. Whitman later worked as a volunteer nurse during the Civil War, writing the collection Drum Traps in connection to the experiences of war-torn soldiers. Having continued to produce new editions of Leaves of Grass along with original works, Whitman died on March 26, 1892 in Camden, New Jersey. In this talk, I'll present a review and commentary on the poetry that constitutes the book Songs of Myself. This most famous of Whitman's works was one of the original 12 pieces in the 1855 first edition of Leaves of Grass. Like most of the other poems, it too was revised extensively, reaching its final permutation in 1881. Songs of Myself is a sprawling combination of biography, sermon, and poetic meditation where Whitman uses symbols and sly commentary to get at important issues. Songs of Myself is composed more of vignettes than listing, and Whitman uses small, precisely drawn scenes to do the work. Whitman's grand poem, in its way, is an American epic. Beginning in media res, that is in the middle of the poet's life, it loosely follows a quest pattern. Missing me one place, search another, he tells his reader. I stop somewhere waiting for you. In its catalogue of American life and its constant search for the boundaries of the self, Song of Myself has much in common with the classical epic. This epic sense of purpose, though, is coupled with almost Keatsian valorization of repose and passive perception. So it's a bit of a paradox. Since for Whitman, the birthplace of poetry is in self, he believes that the best way to learn about poetry is to relax and watch the workings of one's own mind. While Song of Myself is crammed with significant detail, there are 3 key episodes that particularly stand out for examination, in my opinion. The first of these is found in the 6th section of the poem, where a child asks the narrator, "What is the grass?" And the narrator is forced to explore his own use of symbolism and his inability to break things down to essential principles. The bunches of grass in the child's hand become a symbol of the regeneration in nature. They also signify a common material that links disparate people all over the United States together. Grass, the ultimate symbol of democracy, grows everywhere. In the wake of the Civil War, the grass reminds Whitman of graves, because grass feeds on the bodies of the dead. Everyone must die eventually, so the natural roots of democracy are in mortality, whether due to natural causes or due to the bloodshed of internecine warfare. While Whitman normally revels in this kind of symbolic indeterminacy, here it troubles him. The second episode is more optimistic. The famous 29th bather can be found in the 11th section of the poem. In this section, a woman watches 28 young men bathing in the ocean. The invisible 29th bather offers a model of being much like that of Emerson's transparent eyeball. To truly experience the world, one must be fully in it and of it. Yet, One should be distinct enough from it to have some unique perspective, and invisible so as not to interfere with it unduly. This paradoxical set of conditions describes perfectly the poetic stance Whitman tries to assume. It is the longing for communion with every living being and a connection that makes use of both body and soul. Having worked through some of the conditions of perception and creation, Whitman arrives in the third key episode at a moment where speech becomes necessary. In the 25th section, he notes that speech is the twin of my vision. It is unequal to measure itself. It provokes me forever. It says sarcastically, "Walt, you contain enough. Why don't you let it out then?" Having already established that he can have a sympathetic experience when he encounters others, he must find a way to retransmit that experience without falsifying or diminishing it. Resisting easy answers, he later vows that he will never translate himself at all. Instead, then he takes a philosophical, more rigorous stance and says, "What is known, I strip away." And, having catalogued a continent and encompassed its multitudes, he finally decides, "I too am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world." And Song of Myself thus ends with a sound, a loud sound, a yawp that can be described as either pre or post-linguistic. And here is the ending yawn that Whitman lets out in the closing of the poem. "I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you." Now I'll move on to evaluating the critical forms of literature and style that he uses. In terms of evaluation of this poetic works, in terms of the evaluation of the form, Leaves of Grass belongs to no one particular accepted form of poetry. Whitman describes it as this form as a new and national declamatory expression. So he kind of carves out a new distinct form. Whitman was a poet bubbling with energy and burdened with sensations, and his poetic utterances reveal his innovations. In terms of style, if we look at the musical elements, Whitman believed that the poetry should be spoken, not written, and this basic criteria governed the concept and form of his poetry. He used repetition and reiterative devices, for example, in Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking, the lines loud, 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 and blow, blow, blow. And he also employed elements of the opera, in which he had garnered particular interest towards the later part of his life. In as much as language is concerned, Whitman was a master of exuberant phrases and images. He says, "The beautiful uncut hair of graves." You see, this is extraordinarily descriptive. Another description of the grass in the same section of the same poem is, he describes it as the handkerchief of the Lord. This, to me, is sagaciously symbolic. Whitman brought vitality and picturesqueness to his descriptions of the physical world. He was particularly sensitive to sounds and described them with acute awareness. Leaves of Grass contains archaic expressions as well. For example, betimes, betwixt, methinks, happily, etc. In terms of rhythm and meter, Whitman's use of rhythms is notable. A line of his verse, if scanned in the routine way, seems like a prose sentence or an advancing wave of prose rhythm. Yet his work is composed in lines, not in sentences, as prose would be. The line is the unit of sense in Whitman. He experimented with meter, rhythm, and form because he thought that experimentation was the law of the changing times, and that innovation was the gospel of modern world. In terms of imagery, imagery means a figurative use of language. Whitman's use of imagery shows his imaginative power, the depth of his sensory perceptions. He expresses his impressions of the world in language which mirrors the present. He makes the past come alive in his images and makes the future seem immediate. Whitman's imagery has some logical order on the conscious level, but it also delves into the subconsciousness. These images seem like parts of a dream, pictures of fragments of a world. In terms of symbolism, finally, you see, a symbol is an emblem, a concrete object that stands for something abstract. For example, the dove is a symbol of peace, the cross, that of Christianity. Literary symbols, however, have a more particular connotation. They sometimes signify the total meaning or the different levels of meaning which emerge from the work of art in which they appear. A white whale is just an animal, but in Melville's Moby Dick, it is a god to some characters. It's an evil incarnate to others and a mystery to others. In other words, a symbol has an extended connotation. And now I'll move on to the section of the readings where I'd like to present to you, out of the 52 stanzas of the poem, 3 stanzas which particularly appealed to me when I did the first reading of the 1892 version of this poem. Here is how the stanza 18 reads. With music strong I come, with my cornets and my drums. I play not marches for accepted victors only. I play marches for the conquered and slain persons. Have you heard that it was good to gain the day? I also say it is good to fall. Battles are lost in the same spirit in which they are won. I beat and pound for the dead. I blow through my embushers my loudest and gayest for them. Vivas to those who have failed, and to those whose war vessels sank in the sea, and to those themselves who sank in the sea, and to all the generals that lost engagements and all overcome heroes, and the numberless unknown heroes equal to the greatest heroes known. So that's an ode to those who fell, both in the laps of victory and both in the laps of failure. Quite powerful, in my opinion. Here is how the stanza 30 reads. All truths wait in all things. They neither hasten their own delivery nor resist it. They do not need the obstetric forceps of the surgeon. The insignificant is as big to me as any. Logic and sermons never convince. The damp of the night drives deeper into my soul. A minute and a drop of me settle my brain. I believe the soggy clods shall become lovers and lamps, and a compend of compends is the meat of a man or woman, and a summit and flower there is the feeling they have for each other, and they are to branch boundlessly out of that lesson until it becomes omnific, and until one and all shall delight us and we them. Well, I think in the interest of time, I'd just like to keep it to 2 stanzas for now, and I'll implore you all to read the others. And finally, to conclude, a bit of philosophical analysis on the poem. Transcendentalism was a philosophical movement that began to develop in the United States in the mid-1800s. It was largely inspired by Romanticism and the ideas of the famous Greek philosopher Plato, whose Platonic definitions of love can be linked back to the idea of agape as a whole as well. Transcendentalism at its core stems from the idea that every living thing in the universe is interconnected, that the oversoul is a string of sorts connecting each and every one of us to another. This idea is almost identical to that of agape love, just explained in a different form. Agape love also implies that we are all a part of each other, and that as humans, we inherently feel that sort of love for the other members of human race. Whitman's whole Song of Myself poem aligns with the concept and ideas of agape love. But the particular block quote stated above is one of the clearest, most primary examples, the idea that every atom belonging to me belongs to you. This is instrumental in understanding and relating to the thought of agape love. As I read this poem, the macrocosmic demeanor of Whitman celebrating the grandiose self's infinity resonated with me rather peculiarly, and I wondered if I should construe him as a saint. For here was a case, I thought, where the heroic virtue of elevating the perception of self from the microcosm of a being to the macrocosm of an unrestrained and forever present self was being presented. Having resorted to doing some preliminary analysis, it appeared to me that the term saint primarily originates from a designation that Christianity deems on individuals who dwell eternally with God. And furthermore, that the categories of initiation into sainthood and into other forms of attributions are specific to various faith systems, and they evolve in one way or the other. Then my wondering switched gears, and I questioned if my perception of Whitman behind the scene was satisfied with him being solely recognized as bard of democracy. You see, democracy, generally speaking, is a system that gives the demos, or the people, the right to decide how Kratos or a system of rules will apply to them in the outward functioning of their life. While Whitman does recite and relish the freedoms in outward fabric of life, he does not confine his celebration to just the outward fabric of life. Rather, he appears to be excavating the extraordinary from behind the veils of ordinariness of objects that comprise our day-to-day life. This extraordinariness is offered by the pulsating life that exists alike in the feeble strand of a grass to the feebleness of a coffined corpse. The reading of Song of Myself dawn on oneself as to how participatory are both the living and the non-living in the act of blossoming the expanse of ourselves into a cosmic whole, where the divides between the life contained in the perceptually colossal and perceptually minuscule ceases to exist. I invite you to explore this realm of gravity-free navigation which the genius of Whitman sets us on. And with that note, rather than just being content with perhaps calling him a saint or calling him the bard of democracy, I offer another title for him. I call him the Vita Pulsus Principle, Latin, which means principle of life, because that's what Songs of Myself is about, in my humble opinion. That brings us to the end of my talk on Songs of Myself and to our session 10th of the Sikh Women Book Club. In December, we will have the final event of our 2022 sessions. I believe the next session is scheduled for December 17th, where we'll have the final talks for this year. We will continue to have a model of continuing this legacy into the next year, and communications will be forthcoming. On behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar and Nath Pragas USA, I'd like to thank both Penji Amarjeet Kaur and Beti Guneet Kaur for their talks today, and to you all for being a part of the audience today. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.